All right, hello. These are your video class notes for Monday, October, what would that be, the 7th? We are looking at the notes right now. We are probably about 3 days away from finishing, which we look like we'll be on track. So you're looking at your unit test for all absolutism in this unit, chapter 15, to be this coming Thursday, Friday, or something along those lines. But right now it looks like a strong possibility of Thursday. On Thursday last week, we just finished talking about kind of wrapping up absolutism. We talked about Russia, Peter the Great, his effects, his westernization of Russia. Then we briefly ended on the last failed attempts by the Ottomans to make a push towards Vienna. And then eventually you have a lot of people come to the aid of the Austrians. And by 1683, Vienna, with the help of a lot of other people, to help out the Habsburgs, push out the Ottomans down finally. And then over time, by 1699, as we said, Hungarian territory and Transylvanian territory is taken by the Austrian Habsburgs. So the Ottomans, I don't have a map on it right here, but the Ottomans are still occupying some southeastern territory in the neighborhood of like Greece, Macedonia, and those areas, which we'll cover more of that transition later on. But now we're going to go on to the next part of this unit, where we're going to be kind of wrapping up this unit in general the next couple days is looking at the other style of government that takes off, which is constitutionalism. So we're done with absolutism, now moving to constitutionalism. And looking at the poster country for this, which is going to be England. So like we said, Russia and France are like the poster examples of absolutism, and then constitutionalism will be England. In the 1600s, England and the Netherlands evolved towards constitutionalism, where a power is limited by a law and balance between authority and power of government versus rights and liberties of subjects. So I'll say that again. So constitutionalism is where power is limited by law and balance between authority and power of government versus rights and liberties of subjects. Usually the formats these take most commonly are constitutional monarchs or republics. So usually this involves constitutional monarchs or republics. Also keep in mind too for your for the substitute while you're watching these videos, feel free to stop and rewind if necessary. I usually don't make these last the entire 50 minutes of class, so if you need to take some stops along the way, that's completely fine to get definitions. These governments have a constitution, whether it's written or not written. So England famously has several documents that make up their constitution, but they don't actually have one document like the United States has. So, their constitution involves the Magna Carta and several other decisions and documents throughout time over hundreds of years. It's not just one document like ours is. England and the Dutch each will form parliamentary statutes, judicial decisions, and a bundle of traditional procedures and practices to help make their constitution. So the English and the Dutch, their constitutions are formed by parliamentary statutes, judicial decisions, and a body of traditional procedures and practices. All this helps to form their constitution over time. And over time, it gets more of a republic style, but at this point, it's transitioning slowly away from monarchical power for the most part for England. So we're going to look at England first. And we're going to pick up with England after the death of Elizabeth I. So Elizabeth died in 1603, which is like right smack in the middle of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's active in like 1580s until the 16 teens. So she's alive for the first half of William Shakespeare, and then the next guy who takes over is going to be alive for the second half of him. She wielded a lot of power as a monarch. She got a lot of personal power, and she didn't want to share it, which is why she never got married and also never had an heir. She maintained power by refusing to marry and was very popular with her people. So it goes to her cousin, who is next in line. The cousin was a Stuart, that's their last name, and he was Scottish. So James VI of Scotland was king of Scotland whenever she dies. So James VI of Scotland becomes the new king of England. So basically the two crowns are joined together because James VI will now become James I. And don't worry too much about that becoming confusing. Like, while he's originally James VI, in tests and stuff, he'll be referred to as James I. So all you really need to write down is James I. So James I takes over for England. He's now the king of both Scotland and England, and he'll rule for like the first 20 years of the 1600s for the most part. He believed in divine right of kings. So while he's going to believe in divine right and more of an absolutist mentality, what most countries don't have to deal with is a very strong representative body, which is Parliament. So England was very unique in the fact that it had Parliament, and so he's going to have a hard time challenging Parliament's rights versus what he believes the right of the king is. So he's going to challenge the House of Commons a lot over their powers and try to assert himself over Parliament and the House of Commons. House of Commons did not like his threats of removing personal property without due process, because these rights go back to their very weak King John. We talked about back in Unit 1. King John, who was king back in the 1200s, he was so weak that that's how the nobles got the Magna Carta, which Magna Carta eventually leads to like the formation of nobles making parliament. So over time, nobles have gained a lot of authority, especially in this representative body and advising role to the kings and queens, that they don't want to give up these rights like removing personal property without due process. So he challenges Parliament a lot, but it's really his son who's going to have the most controversy. So his son, who takes over as king in 1625, is Charles I, and he's the guy we're more concerned with, and more than likely the one you're going to see more questions on a test about, because he's the king during the Civil War. Charles I was even more against the constraints that Parliament presented to him, because he believed even more strongly in divine right, and believed that he should basically work his way to become this absolute monarch of England. So tension only got worse in the 1620s and 30s as England was getting involved in the 30 Years' War, and fighting between France and Spain heightened too. So remember, in the 1630s, England is getting involved, not really one-on-one fighting, but they're backing up certain people, and they're getting more intertwined in the fighting that's happening in continental Europe. Charles I decides to stop allowing Parliament to meet in 1629. So he was tired of basically having them try to pass laws, pass tax laws, those kind of things. So he basically decided, well, I'm not going to authorize you to meet anymore as of 1629. So about a decade goes by before Parliament's allowed to come back together under him. He just basically tries to rule on his own, kind of like Louis XIV. In the meantime, you have this very dissatisfied and persecuted group called the Puritans, which you might have heard of before. The Puritans are this very strict Calvinist-influenced Protestant group to form in the late 1500s. And they did not call themselves Puritans. People called them Puritans because they wanted to purify the Church of England, which is the church that was now the official church of the country, of any Catholic influences. They thought there were still too many Catholic-esque ceremony types in their way they did services, and they wanted to remove that. So on a test, you just need to call them Puritans. Like, they call themselves Congregationalists, but you can just call them Puritans, and it's fine. These Calvinist Puritans wanted to purify the Anglican Church of any Catholic elements, things like vestments, ceremonial items, bishops, so on and so forth. So James I and Charles I persecuted them. So you basically see a religious division happening in the 16 teens and 20s. As you know from various years of school, James I begins to persecute the Puritans because of their very different beliefs in the 16 teens, which is why a lot of them end up leaving, going to Holland, and they don't like Holland, so they end up leaving and going to live in America and making Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay in the 1620s and 30s. So a lot of them are leaving in the 1620s and 30s because of persecution of their religion. Now keep in mind, they have no interest in trying to make it to where everybody can practice their own religion in society. They believe they're the most correct, and they want to go off and live by themselves. And basically, if you go live in Massachusetts and you don't follow Puritan orthodoxy, then you're banished because you're not living the Christ-like lifestyle. Remember, these are Calvinist people, so they're very elect-minded and so forth and so on. Anyway, so you see a lot of religious division taking place. More controversy came when Charles I married a French princess who was Catholic and supported heavy-handed policies of the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud. William Laud was the head of the church for England, but he was also very sympathetic towards Catholics. So Laud and Charles I in the 1630s basically began to become more anti-Puritan and more kind of pro-Catholic leaning. Laud was anti-Calvinist and practiced some secret Catholic practices. He imposed a new Book of Common Prayer, which was like their official holy book in England. And he elevated more priests to bishop positions. So basically, he creates more bishops, which makes it more hierarchical, make it more like the Catholic Church, and less like the Puritans wanted. Because Puritans want a very simplified service, not all this hierarchy and structure like the Catholic Church has, and just makes them upset. So all this is setting the stage for the Civil War in England. So looking now at the lead up to Civil War, Charles avoided grievances by not calling Parliament from 1629 to 1640. He also passed levies, or taxes, during this time, many considered illegal, because a lot of the nobles didn't want to pay the taxes because Parliament had earned the right, or the power of purse, which means the right to basically collect taxes or make taxes. And so since they weren't meeting and he was making these taxes on his own, a lot of folks didn't want to follow them or enforce them. Also, in the late 30s and early 40s, Scottish Calvinists revolted in 1640, and Charles I had to call Parliament to raise taxes for an army. So basically now, Charles has to make a decisive move and go ahead and raise this army to put down this rebellion in Scotland. So he has to raise a whole lot of more money now. So he decides in 1640 that now Parliament has to meet to make this money legit and raise it. But here's the thing. Now Parliament members have learned their lesson. When they come back to office here in 1640, they're not going to let it go. This Parliament's going to refuse to stop meeting, even though Charles later will try to disband them again. This is going to be referred to as a Long Parliament. So it's going to last from 1640 to 1660, where essentially the same members constantly meet and don't stop meeting. So this is referred to as the Long Parliament, 1640 to 1660. They passed much legislation to limit the power of the monarch and made ruling without them impossible. So basically this is where Parliament's trying to basically make it to where they can pass laws without the king's authority, kind of like they do now. And so now you have this big power conflict between Parliament and King Charles I. But basically they're trying to outline where their powers are and limit his powers in general. They also decided to impeach Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and threatened to abolish bishops in general and just basically just have priests. So they also threatened to abolish all bishops and just have priests instead. That way you have less of this hierarchical structure and less Catholic-like structure too to the church. Charles I, though, complies with many of their changes, at least for the meantime, because he needs to put down the Scottish insurrection. So he's like, let me deal with Scotland and I'll come back and worry about Parliament later on. Then in 1641, Ireland also rebels due to the English oppression there and because of their anti-Catholic policies. Remember, Ireland's full of Catholics. They began to rebel too. So now you got Ireland and Scotland rebelling at the same time in the early 40s. Charles couldn't respond because Parliament wouldn't raise an army. He tried and failed to arrest Parliament leaders then. So basically, things are getting out of control, and Parliament's wanting to withhold some of this power. Charles wants to raise a larger and larger army, and Parliament's basically resisting some of his attempts at too much power. And so this is whenever he decides to basically go arrest Parliament leaders that are against him and only have people in Parliament that are for him. And that's what's going to spark off the Civil War that starts officially in 1642. So I'm going to stop the first video there, and we'll pick up the rest of the notes in this video